In this video, you will join a breakout session in progress in which a team of teachers from the school at Columbia University in New York are demonstrating how they use the power of multiple literacies to reach their student body that is among the most diverse in the country. In the first part of the session, the presenters showed how to teach a unit on the Holocaust using the graphic novel Mouse by Art Spiegelman. By using this combination of narrative and images, the lesson could be differentiated and the subject matter made more accessible for students of varying degrees of readiness. We now join the session as our teacher Kim Lane continues the presentation and focuses on how to use combinations of text and images to make literacy instruction more inviting and effective.
I heard some people, I think, have seen this image before, perhaps. Some of you might be familiar with it. I have to say, as the art teacher in the school, this unit that I do, this interdisciplinary unit with social studies and English, is fantastic because there are so many different ways of using art to start talking about that relationship between text and image, that idea of how can you talk about content, what you're trying to say, and form, the way that you say it. So, does anybody here speak French? Or does anybody just know what you can read? Okay, please, go ahead.
Oh, you want me to read it in French?
Sure. And then you can tell us what you think.
C'est pas un pipe. This is not a pipe.
This is not a pipe,
My
right?
pronunciation.
Jess, you can go to the next one. That's all right. We're not getting graded on pronunciation today. This is not a pipe. This is an image, a painting called The Treachery of Images by René Magritte. And this is a fantastic little just spark to get the kids discussing that relationship between text and image. So I would throw out to you, what do you think is more important in this piece, the text or the image? You think the text?
Well, because I think it's giving the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Well, because I think it is a pipe, and then I read that it's not, so now I wonder what it is.
Okay.
So without the text, I'd just be like, oh, that's a pipe.
It's a pipe, got it. Okay, moving on. Because a few other people are nodding. Does anybody think that the image is more important? I mean, René Magritte is the painter, after all, right? Everyone's like, no, without the text, it's a pipe. Well, Magritte...
Similar to a pipe anyway. It has to be something along that line.
Right, well, Magritte, when people said, but it is a pipe, and he said, try to pack it with tobacco. It's a painting of a pipe, right? So he is already, I mean, and the kids do the same thing, oh. And that thinking about, and we're not even looking at a painting, right? We're looking at a digital image of the painting, that's projected on a screen. So it's just a very nice way to sort of get into that relationship between text and image. You go to the next one. And then, when you think about visual literacy, it's all around us all the time, right? And so to look at a piece like this where you have an image and the text that are interrelated in that same way, that they really don't work one without the other. And something like this that's very familiar to the kids is really fun for them, because then they start thinking about, oh, where else have I seen that combination of text and image where they both work so beautifully together. So I'm going to show you some more pictures, but before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about the terms that we're using, because when we start to think about this medium, some people might say comics, or they say, oh, I'm a comic artist, or you think about cartoons that you see in the Sunday paper, or you've heard the term graphic novel. But Will Eisner, who is the artist and the creator of The Spirit, which is a really iconic comic from the 50s, he has written a lot about this medium, and he likes to use that term of visual narrative. And if you think about visual narrative as sort of a general way of presenting ideas through images. So using images to present ideas. So, okay, so we've got that idea. You can use images to present ideas. Let's refine it a little bit more. So maybe we could start thinking about it as using images in a sequence. So then you're into that idea of sequential art. So images that are more than one that actually are set together in a particular order. You go to the next next one. And that idea of using images to tell a story through a sequence, maybe it's a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are so many examples of this in art history throughout time and across cultures. If I didn't tell you here that this is from Egypt, and I can put this slide up and show it to the kids, and I'll say, what culture do you think this might be from? I mean, right away, people are going to say, oh, it looks Egyptian. Well, how do you know? And we start thinking about, well, the way that the figures are, they know that their figures sort of seem like they're to the front, but their faces are to the side. And we really start thinking about, all right, in this particular culture, this is an example from the tomb of Mena. And Mena was a private citizen. He was a scribe of a really important temple. And in his tomb, on the walls all around the tomb are images like this that depict scenes from his daily life and daily life of the area where he lived. So this is one example, and over 3,000 years ago. So obviously this medium goes back a long way. Let's go to the next one. This is the Bayeux tapestry. So here now we're in France in the 11th century. This is a 270 feet long embroidered artwork. I mean, if any of you knit or crochet or embroider, I mean, you just wrap your head around 270 feet of it. But it tells the story of the Norman conquest from the French point of view. And the legend has it that this was William the Conqueror's wife did this, but we actually think his brother commissioned it. We don't really think that she did it. But it's an incredible piece that reads from left to right, and as you move across the tapestry, you also are moving through time. So it's not meant to be one piece of a scene that's happening all in the moment. You're moving through time. So it is a series of sequential images that are also chronological. This is from the Codex Zushnatal, and again, this is just one piece of a very large manuscript of the Mixtec people, which are a pre-Columbian culture in Mexico, circa 14th century. And again, this idea of a story. This one is the story of a particular ruler, and I have to get his name exactly right because it's so excellent. Lord Eight Deer Jaguar Claw, which will be my new club name, I think. But yeah, so it's Lord Eight Deer Jaguar Claw, but it's the story of his conquests, his successes, right? All again told in a narrative sequence through images. Why, if you were Lord Eight Deer Jaguar Claw, why might you have one of your court artists create something like this? I mean, why not just put a sign up when you come into town that says, Lord Eight Deer Jaguar Claw rocks, just... Why would you use something like this? Why might he commission that?
You will find, and actually I'll talk about it right now.
Yeah, what do you
Would
think?
he have done it to show off
Yeah, what is he showing off?
his grandeur?
He is, and who is he showing them off to? Who does he want to see these images? Possibly, might you think?
Enemies.
Could be enemies, right? Could be
You will find, obviously.
his own people. Yeah, his own people, right? The common people. And even if you are illiterate in the sense that you cannot read written writing, at the time, these images would make sense to you and you could read it. In the same way, in the Catholic Church in Europe, there are many images used in churches, and those images were there because a lot of the people were illiterate, but they might not be able to read the Bible, read the word for word in Latin, but you could look at images in a church and get the stories and understand the messages. So this is another example. I think we have one more. Oh, this is Max Stearns with a different kettle of fish, but across time, and there are many other examples. You could think of Greek and Roman friezes. You could think of, if you're familiar at all with any Asian literature, the Tale of Genji and the Japanese screens. I mean, there are the countless examples in art history of using a series of images to tell a story. This is Max Ernst, and I put this up here because we are dealing with adolescents, and if you work with adolescents, you know that surrealism makes a lot of sense to them. That idea of My interior world doesn't necessarily match the exterior world. So Max Ernst created this series of, they're actually collages. They look here like illustrations, but they're actually collages. It's over 180 altogether that tell the story of a sequence of dreams. So this is one that really appeals to kids. Is anyone familiar with this piece, The Great Migration by Jacob Lawrence? Jacob Lawrence is an African-American artist whose family was a part of the Great Migration. And the Great Migration is that time after World War I, before World War II, when many, many African Americans who were living in the South migrated north to come to cities like Boston. Actually, at the next slide, I'll show you. Chicago, New York, St. Louis. So, and in this, what Jacob Lawrence did was he created a series of 60 paintings. 60, and they're not much bigger than this, actually. They're not very big. But with those paintings, he also put together the text. So this is his writing. Would someone volunteer to just read? So that's not my voice. What do you think?
Around the time I was born, many African Americans from the South left home and traveled to cities in the North in search of a better life. My family was part of this great migration.
Right. And so here's another image, and you can see on the bottom it's labeled number 10. The first one, what we just looked at was the first one. But these are images, and what I love about Jacob Lawrence is he's so accessible to kids. I just a few weeks ago actually used this image with some third graders who are thinking about how they can use text together with pictures. And we talked about, why do you think Jacob Lawrence decided to use both pictures and text? He had the story. I mean, he even had it written down. Why did he feel then that he needed to use paintings together with that? So we thought, let's think about this image in particular. How does seeing the picture change or impact the way that the message that you're getting in the words? Yeah.
If I looked at the picture, I would just think it was two people sitting down to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But after reading the words, I would notice that there wasn't any food.
Okay. Sure. So the words are going to influence the way you interpret the painting. And I can tell you, just in the interest of time, what some of the third graders said was, well, you know, it's one thing you can read that it says that food was really expensive and it made life harder. But they said, but then when I look at the painting, I feel so sad. And it makes me, I feel like they look so sad. And there's no food. And look, the only thing that they have in their house is a nail with one pot hanging from it. So even a third grader can understand that they are impacted more powerfully by seeing an image together with the text. So now, let me talk a little bit about Mouse again. Why do you think we, as 8th grade teachers, when it's part of our curriculum, we want to teach the kids about the Holocaust, why do we choose Mouse, a graphic novel, to present some of this very difficult information to 8th graders? Why do we do that? Because, I mean, there are endless horrifying images that we could use, but why a graphic novel like that?
Well, like you said, it makes it more accessible to the kids. And it is a really tough topic, but when you talk about it with pictures, it makes it a little easier.
Absolutely. Does that make sense? Does anybody want to add? What was that? Yeah.
Plus, I think that they can sometimes become intimidated by pictures like this because they don't know exactly what they mean. When they're looking at mouse, the fact that, I'm assuming that they're mice.
Yes.
Okay. When they're looking at that novel, it's more of not elementary, but something for them to relate to more. They're not intimidated by the text because it's not only is it a comic, but it's a simplified comic, and I think that it allows them to feel more comfortable talking about something as deep as the Holocaust.
Yeah, absolutely. And we asked this question of the kids, and they say back exactly what you just said. They understand that. So in Mouse, the Jews are represented as mice, the Nazis are represented as cats. And so they will say, well, it's a way, basically it makes the unbearable a little bit bearable. Like, yeah, they can bear, and I mean, I feel that way too. I mean, I can bear to read this, even though the content and what I'm learning is unbearable, and it might be too much if I'm looking at the images. You know, you get overwhelmed. When we think about sort of the more contemporary history of visual narrative and graphic storytelling. And when I use that word graphic in this way, I just mean it's drawings. So graphic storytelling. This particular book, and you'll see it back there among our resources of wordless books, the original graphic novels, these are artists who used woodcuts, which is a form of printmaking, used woodcuts to tell stories without any text at all. And I have an example on Franz Marold, if you go to the next one. And this is from The Passionate Journey, which tells the story in several of woodcuts of a young man arriving in the city and what happens to him. So I have just 3 images. So this is the first one, but right, here's the last one. They're gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, there's so many things that you could do with students. I mean, you could give them a string of 6 or 5 of these images and ask them to write the story of what they think is happening and compare notes. And even with very young children, you can find storybooks that have no text, or you could do the same thing. We have a couple of those as well. Let's go to the next one. So in terms of what's happening now, I think it's important to think, so if we realize, maybe go back one, that from between when these artists were working, which was sort of in the early 1900s to the 1930s, and then in the 1930s to the 1950s, there was this explosion of, in the United States, of comic art that is familiar. When you think about comic books, you know, we think about things that look like this. But at the time when these were really popular, most people really looked down on this. I mean, this was lowbrow. Both the form, you know, it was like, you know, these hacks who, you know, make these images, and the content. This was not about anything of very much importance, right? These are just stories for kids. But that has completely changed. And now, in contemporary time, you can find this medium, this process of graphic storytelling to present nonfiction material on almost any topic that you can imagine. We have a few examples. So here's a biography of Isadora Duncan, all told in graphic form, with text, but on graphic form. This is an example of a graphic diary of the campaign trail, McCain and Obama, that just recently came out, and you can bet we're going to use this one this year. Even the 9/11 report, I mean, if you want to think about content, like how could you possibly, but the 9/11 report has been turned into a graphic story. So there's just about anything that you're interested in, you can probably find an example that you could use as a way in. Last year, okay, now we can go. Last year, I mean, the timing of this was amazing. When we were teaching this, the New York Times was running a piece by one of their reporters who was reporting in graphic narrative. So and I just have a little snippet. We can give you the link, or you can find it on the New York Times website. But so we looked at this in their social studies class during social studies time. We read it in the same way that you just took on roles and read the parts together. We read this together and talked a little bit about, asked the kids questions like, I actually have them right here. You know, who are the characters? What's the action taking place? As a reporter, why would you think that Robertson would choose graphic narrative as a medium for his report? I mean, and this is the New York Times, sort of a preeminent news organization. Why are they choosing to present? This was straight news. This was a report. This was not, you know, on the op-ed page cartoons. This was a report. So we asked them, you know, is a graphic narrative like this a valid form of reporting news? So we're going back and forth between the content from Maus and the Holocaust to contemporary times and getting them to think a little bit about this medium in general. Let's see, I think one more. Oh, I just want to show you a few examples of the kids' work, because we did do hands-on work as well. One of the things that Eve assigns them to do is the kids create a graphic representation of themselves as an animal that could represent themselves. So this is one girl, and you can, I'm sure it's a little hard to read, but she is representing herself as a gazelle in New York City. You see the New York City taxi up there? And she's saying, gazelles are elegant and shy. I think sometimes I can be shy and elegant. And she goes on from there. Let's go to another one. Here's a cow who plays the violin, and just like Swara. But so the students all created a graphic representation of themselves, and this is again is dovetailing with that conversation that we just had in Mouse about why does Spiegelman represent the characters as mice and cats. Let's go to the next one. Then, after they had done that, they came into the art studio and we asked them to create a graphic story that would show some part of what they had studied in the Holocaust, or they had another social justice project that they were also working on. So it could be either related to their social justice project or the Holocaust. So they came to me with the content already. They already know the story that they wanted to tell, and in the art studio we worked together to figure out how they could show it in a visual way. And you can see we looked at a lot of different examples of page layouts. We talked a little bit about what are you going to show in the image, what are you going to show in the text, how will you make the things that are the most important, how will you stress that visually. I think the next one actually is not, it's a little bit illegible. I could read it on my computer, but it's not showing up so well here, but it gives you a sense of the layout of the page. So, yeah, so that was work that we did in the art studio, and again, and it was graded both in art and in English, and we all looked at it together, so it really was very interdisciplinary.
If you have not done so already, we invite you to consider using graphic novels or other forms of visual narrative to diversify your instruction. Using multiple literacies can help all students find excitement and fulfillment in reading and writing.